morning. So here as I move around is a look at the inside of the aft cabin on this KHSD 37, formerly known as Epicurus, now known as hull voids. Before I had any idea as to really how to go about doing this, addressing these hull voids and how to get around them, I started working from the inside. And really it started because this area right here along the port side was rotted, and the rot started because of an opening up here where the rudder quadrant cable came through the deck, where it was not properly sealed, and this small shelf up here filled up with water, rainwater primarily, and that migrated down through into this void, which stayed full. And from out here, no one had a clue, myself included. Well, when I mounted a motor bracket on the side of this thing, I drilled a hole through the hull right about there. Water poured out, and I couldn't figure out why then. Once I got in here and I found out that this inner layer was rotten, I started poking around and I found the water up in there. In any event, so I needed something to really bond this new rudder case to that wouldn't be rotten. So I ground out this inner layer and attempted to vacuum bag another flat sheet in. More on why that didn't work later. But what I discovered when I was grinding this off was that there were some areas that were not stuck together very well, save for a few sparse legs of epoxy here and there. And when I came down here to the other side, I started noticing the same. So in pursuit of the end of this endless void, I started grinding out and grinding out and grinding out and grinding out and grinding out, and as you can see in this process of insanity, I ground out 2 full inner layers of the hull. This was wrong. I should have stopped back here at the rudder case, taken a breather, gone outside with my circular saw and grid scored those 2 non-laminated outer layers and stripped them away, and left the inner layer and the keel joint, which is very, very material intensive on the epoxy front, in place. But again, lessons learned. I had no guidance or direction when I started this, so here's what I'm left with. The void that I discovered hit its pinnacle. Became most pronounced right about here. You can see, if I take a piece of scrap 3mm here, this is a piece of 3mm thick, run-of-the-mill junk, non-waterproof plywood. You can see it fits right down through there like a hot dog down a hallway. And coming back over here, if I can bring you down to a good perspective here, this void became more pronounced where a very, very lousy scarf overlapped another piece of plywood, probably as it was bagged down onto the infamous biaxial mold, which really contributes to the cause of these voids. You cannot just shift the layers of plywood in the middle of a laminate that have scarfed edges and not expect something like this to happen. It is geometrically impossible to avoid, to not occur. In any event, yes, you can see that these layers here were completely non-connected. Very, very, very large gap all the way down here to the keel. And if you have a slightly closer look here, you can see the glossy appearance of the epoxy right down here at the keel. This layer of wood was not bonded to the inner layer of wood, which had the composite glass keel attached to it. So basically, these outer layers were really not attached to anything here. Every time a wave would slam up against this hull, this was moving on the outside. The implications of this are several. Their severity is really unknown to me. I would never be able to get the designer to fess up to any of this or acknowledge that this is an inherent problem with his construction technique, the cylinder molded construction technique. And I would love to be able to say that this boat was a rare case of this. However, considering that all three hulls, both of which have their own halves that were individually bagged down, so that's 6 halves, all of which are not laminated together along the keel. This is a very common problem with this type of construction. I am fairly confident in saying that, and I really feel that the U.S. Coast Guard should have a closer look at the cylinder molded vessels that are out there in service right now. Again, no hate toward the designer. I think he's a brilliant architect, and he's accomplished something in his life that I'd be lucky if I ever accomplish at all. But really, there are some issues with this construction method that have to be addressed. I have not had success getting a piece of plywood to bend in 2 directions using a vacuum pump. You can see that I had to use a lot of filler, and even as much as I used, there were still areas with voids. So I ditched that idea altogether. I went back to a variation of an older construction method that used basically planks, but instead of using veneer, I used a similar like material, 3mm plywood. I scarfed each edge so they're well joined, and laid them in at 30 degrees. I was able to get a solid lamination this way and work in small increments. Okay, I've been rambling on enough about this. We'll cover this some more later, but I wanted to get a good documented record of this for posterity, so that after I take this out, there'll be no question as to whether or not there was any validity in my attempts here. All right, take care. Bye.